The first light of dawn drifted through the trees like pale smoke, soft and slow. Mist hung low over the damp earth, carrying a strange sound, thin, trembling, and distant. It came again, faint but desperate, a cry that didn't belong to any bird. The few villagers awake at this hour paused their work, listening. Beneath the calm breath of the forest, something was calling for help. They followed the sound down a narrow trail where the grass grew heavy with dew. Each step brought them closer to the lowlands where rainwater had gathered through the night. The air grew cooler, and the scent of mud filled their lungs. Then, as the mist parted, they saw it, a small elephant calf, half buried in the earth. Its legs were sunk deep into the wet ground, its sides coated in thick clay. Every movement it made only pulled it lower. The calf's eyes were wide and glassy with fear. It struggled weakly, the effort draining what little strength remained. The villagers stood still for a long moment, unsure whether to move closer. The air was filled with small, broken cries, not the sharp trumpet of an elephant, but a thin, helpless sound, like a baby calling into emptiness. Around the pit, the prints of a large elephant marked the edges of the clearing, the mother's path. She must have tried to help and failed, circling, waiting, then retreating to the forest when she realized she could not stay. The villagers exchanged quiet glances. They knew elephants often returned for their young, but this calf had been trapped for too long. Mud covered its trunk, its ears drooped low, and its breathing came in short, uneven bursts. One man stepped forward, careful not to startle it. The ground squelched beneath his feet. He crouched near the edge and whispered softly, his voice barely above the wind. "Easy, little one!" The calf froze, its small body trembling. It looked toward the sound, but did not move. The man waited, his hands steady at his sides. Behind him, others gathered, their faces lined with concern. They spoke in low tones, planning what to do. The mud pit was wide and deep. One wrong step could trap a person too. But leaving the calf there meant certain death. The night cold, the weight of the earth, the exhaustion that would soon quiet its voice forever. The villagers noticed the faint marks of struggle on the pit's edge, signs of the mother's strength and desperation. Broken roots, torn grass, deep grooves where her tusks might have pushed. It was clear she had fought hard before being forced to abandon her baby. The thought brought a hush among them. In that silence, the calf's cry rose once more, softer this time, a fading sound. The mist thickened again, wrapping the scene in pale gray. Birds began to stir overhead, their calls faint but familiar, reminders of the world continuing beyond this small tragedy. The man near the calf reached out a hand, not to touch, but to let it see him. The calf's breathing slowed, its trunk twitched once, and for a fleeting moment, its eyes closed as if surrendering to the quiet. One of the women stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "We can't leave it," she murmured. He nodded. No more words were needed. The morning had broken with a cry, and now the village had heard it. Around them, the forest waited, silent, watchful, as though it too held its breath. The rescue had not yet begun, but in that moment, something sacred had already taken root, a fragile thread between fear and hope, life and the will to save it. The calf's cries had quieted by the time the villagers returned with ropes and wooden poles. The morning mist had begun to lift, leaving behind a dull gray sky that seemed to mirror the heaviness in the air. Around the pit, the ground was slick with water, and each step sank into the mud with a sound that spoke of weight and waiting. The calf stood trembling in the center, its front legs nearly swallowed by the earth, its back legs struggling for purchase. Every slight movement sent ripples through the mud, and with each ripple it slipped a little deeper. One of the older men knelt by the edge, pressing his palm to the wet soil to test its firmness. It gave way easily, soft and treacherous. He looked up at the others and shook his head. They could not simply pull. The suction of the mud would hold fast. The calf tried again to lift a leg, straining, its trunk reaching out as if searching for something solid. Its breath came fast, nostrils flaring, skin glistening with sweat and damp earth. The sound of its effort was faint but constant, a low, labored groan carried on the wind. The villagers spoke little. Their voices were quiet, respectful, as though words might deepen the calf's despair. A young man fetched more rope from a cart, uncoiling it carefully so as not to startle the animal. Another woman, her clothes streaked with mud from earlier, placed a small bundle of leaves near the edge, not to feed, but to bring a familiar scent. The calf's ears flicked weakly toward the sound of movement. Its eyes, half-lidded from exhaustion, blinked slowly, watching shapes it no longer had the strength to fear. Hours seemed to stretch thin around them. The sun climbed higher, warming the air but doing little to dry the mud. Flies circled in lazy loops above the calf's back, settling briefly before being brushed away by its slow, instinctive movements. It tried once more to pull free, trunk curling, muscles tightening beneath the thick gray skin. The mud clung tighter, sucking at its legs like heavy chains. A small cry escaped it, not sharp or loud, but weary, the sound of something too tired to hope yet unwilling to surrender. A few villagers turned away, unable to watch. They whispered among themselves about how long it might have been trapped, judging by the tracks around the pit, perhaps since the previous night, when rain had softened the ground. The mother's prints were still visible on the far side, deep, circling, fading into the forest. She must have stayed until dawn before fear drove her away. The thought lingered unspoken in everyone's mind. If she returned now, she would find her calf still here, still fighting, still waiting. One of the men moved closer, his voice steady though his heart was unsteady. "Easy now. Easy," he murmured. The calf turned its head slightly, its gaze settling on him for a moment. There was no understanding in that look, only exhaustion and the faint awareness of presence, a reminder that it was not alone. Its trunk lifted weakly, brushing the air, then fell again. The man stayed kneeling, his hand resting on the mud between them, a gesture of quiet promise. Time passed without measure. The forest around them began to hum with life again. Insects, distant birds, the rustle of leaves stirred by a slow wind. Yet inside the pit, the world remained still. The calf no longer cried. Its breath came shallow and steady, its strength slipping away in silence. The villagers watched, their faces drawn and solemn. They had come to help, but for now, all they could do was wait. The earth held the little elephant tight, unwilling to let go, and the morning stretched toward noon with the weight of helplessness pressing down on every heart. By midday, the air had thickened with heat and the sharp scent of wet soil. Around the pit, the villagers had formed a quiet circle of resolve. No one gave instructions aloud. They simply moved as one, guided by necessity and compassion. The ropes were laid out in long coils, rough from years of use, their fibers already darkened by the mud. Wooden planks, carried from a nearby shed, were placed carefully across the softest ground to create a firm edge for footing. Every motion was measured, every word scarce. The calf remained still for long moments at a time, the slow rise and fall of its chest the only sign of life. One of the younger men waded into the pit first, testing each step before committing his weight. The mud clung up to his knees, cold and thick, threatening to pull his balance away. The calf stirred at his approach, lifting its trunk weakly and releasing a strained, breathy sound. The man paused, murmuring low, "It's all right. Easy now." He waited until the animal's breathing steadied again before moving closer, securing a loop of rope around its midsection. Each time the rope tightened, the calf shuddered and let out a soft, pained cry. The sound made several villagers flinch, but no one looked away. The first pull began slowly. 4 men took the ends of the rope, digging their heels into the mud-slick earth. Muscles strained, rope creaked, and for a moment it seemed to give way. The calf's body shifted an inch, then stopped, the mud swallowing it back. The sound of snapping fibers broke the stillness, and the rope split near its knot, recoiling through the air and striking one man's arm. He hissed sharply but did not drop his hold. The effort had to continue. The old rope was replaced with another, thicker one. Sweat glistened on foreheads and forearms, and the damp fabric of their clothes clung tightly to their skin. The calf's eyes followed their movement with quiet confusion. Its trunk lifted weakly once more, touching the rope that now circled its body. It let out a low moan, deep and soft, the sound of fatigue more than fear. The woman who had brought the leaves earlier stepped forward again, crouching near the pit's edge. Her hands were steady, her voice steady too. "Shh! You're not alone," she whispered. She stayed there, her knees sinking slightly into the wet ground until the calf stilled. Something in her tone, in the rhythm of her presence, seemed to reach through the panic that had once filled the animal's body. The next pull began with greater coordination. 2 ropes were fastened, one around the chest, another supporting the hindquarters. A plank was slid beneath the calf's side as leverage, its edges disappearing beneath the mud. When they began again, it was not strength alone that moved the animal, but rhythm, small, patient heaves in unison, timed with the slow tilt of the body. The calf let out a sudden cry, sharp and brief, and the woman's voice came again, quiet but firm. "Almost there." Her words were not for comfort alone. They carried focus, a steady pulse that matched the will of those around her. Mud splashed across faces and arms, streaking skin with earth. The villagers worked in silence except for the labored sound of effort, the groan of ropes, the soft suction of the pit giving way. Inch by inch, the calf began to rise. The curve of its shoulder appeared first, then part of its flank. Each gain seemed small, but the air around them shifted, charged with the unspoken knowledge that they were closer than before. Even the birds, which had fallen quiet during the commotion, began to call again in the distance. The work stretched into hours. Shadows shortened and the air shimmered with heat. Several times the villagers paused, not to rest, but to listen, to gauge the calf's breathing, to see if its heart still fought beneath the layers of exhaustion. When they resumed, it was with renewed care. They no longer pulled in sudden bursts, but in gentle, steady motions that matched the animal's rhythm of struggle and surrender. Each motion was deliberate, as though they understood that trust was forming, not through words or reason, but through presence. At last, the calf's front legs broke free from the mud's grip. It lay panting, its body trembling as the remaining ropes eased their tension. No cheer rose from the group. Instead, a quiet stillness fell. The woman reached out again, brushing a bit of mud from its side. The calf turned its head slightly, its ear flicking once as though acknowledging the nearness of human hands. Around them, the light had softened to gold, and the forest exhaled a slow, tired breeze. They had not yet finished. Much of the calf's body still lay caught, but something unseen had already shifted. The air between man and animal no longer felt divided by fear. It was now joined by effort, by shared endurance, by the silent agreement that life, fragile as it was, would be protected here. In the quiet that followed, no one spoke. The only sound was the calf's heavy breathing, mingled with the faint creak of rope and the heartbeat of earth slowly loosening its hold. The final pull came as the day began to fade, the light turning softer, warmer, stretching across the clearing in long amber lines. Hours of labor had worn the villagers thin, their arms coated in mud, their breaths deep and rhythmic like the steady beat of a drum. They stood in silence, gathered once more around the ropes, their faces marked by fatigue but not surrender. In the pit, the calf lay half free, its shoulders lifted above the muck, but its hind legs still caught in the dense, sucking soil that refused to release what it held. The air was still heavy, but something had changed. Even the forest seemed to wait. One of the men gave a nod, and slowly the ropes tightened again. The sound was faint, a strained creak followed by the low grunt of effort as they leaned back together. The earth shifted beneath their boots. The calf's body lurched forward a little, its breath sharp and uneven. Its skin, slick with mud, glistened in the dimming light. For a heartbeat, the pull stopped, the group pausing to listen, to feel. Then, with one final surge of human strength against nature's weight, the suction gave way. The calf slid forward and fell, heavy and trembling, onto solid ground. The moment hung still, almost fragile. No one spoke. Mud and water dripped from the young elephant's sides, pooling beneath its small, shaking frame. It did not move at first, its trunk lying limp across the earth. The villagers watched from where they stood, hands gripping ropes, breath held tight in their chests. After so many hours of sound, cries, commands, splashes, the silence now felt immense. The woman who had stayed closest to the calf knelt a few feet away, her hands still muddy, her eyes fixed on the creature's slow, rising chest. A minute passed, then another. And then, as if pulled by an invisible thread, the calf drew in a deep, shuddering breath. Its trunk lifted slightly, trembling as it searched the air. A faint sound escaped, a thin, broken trumpet, fragile as a sigh. But it carried something pure, a pulse of life returning to a body that had almost given in. The villagers exhaled in quiet relief, the kind that came not as victory but gratitude. The woman smiled softly, her voice barely a whisper. "You're all right. You're all right now." The calf stirred again, its legs shifting beneath its body. The ground beneath it was uneven, but it pushed with slow, deliberate effort. Its knees bent, straightened, bent again. The small muscles along its back rippled beneath the thick skin as it fought gravity's pull. The villagers did not move to help. They stood back, understanding that this part, the rising, belonged only to the animal. Its trunk pressed against the ground for balance, and with one uncertain motion, it lifted itself onto shaking legs. The weight of its body wavered, its stance unsteady, but it stood. For a long time, the calf remained there, swaying slightly, head low, its breath loud in the stillness. Mud clung to every inch of its body, yet its eyes were open now, clear and alert. It turned its head toward the group of humans, the dark wetness of its gaze meeting theirs. There was no fear in that moment, no defiance, only awareness. The people who had labored to pull it free did not cheer. They simply stood, shoulders slack, eyes bright with quiet awe. The distance between them felt smaller somehow, bridged by effort and something wordless, older than either species. The calf lifted its trunk once more, pointing it toward the forest as if drawn by some remembered scent. It took one slow step, then another, the movement heavy but certain. Each foot sank slightly into the wet soil, leaving behind deep impressions, marks of struggle and survival. The villagers parted, making space without a word. The woman remained kneeling, watching as the young elephant passed close enough for her to feel the faint push of air from its breath. Then, without hesitation, the calf moved toward the tree line, its body catching the last light of day, its outline slowly swallowed by the forest's gentle shade. Behind it, no one spoke. The ropes lay discarded in the mud, the sound of them settling soft and final. The forest exhaled, a single breeze stirring through the tall grass. In that breath of quiet, the bond between man and wild lingered, unseen, but alive, carried into the trees with the calf's slow, steady steps. The forest had begun to cool when the calf finally took its first steps beyond the clearing. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and crushed grass, the quiet aftermath of a long struggle. Mud still clung to its small body in uneven streaks, dark against the soft gray of its skin. Each step seemed uncertain at first, the weight of exhaustion pressing against its legs. Yet something deeper, an instinct older than fear, drew it forward, toward the trees that waited like silent guardians. The villagers stood where they were, their feet sunk in wet soil, eyes following every movement as if afraid that sound might break the fragile peace that had settled around them. The young elephant paused at the edge of the forest, where light met shadow. Its trunk lifted slowly, curling through the air in search of scent or memory. The mist was beginning to return, rolling low along the ground, softening the edges of everything. Behind the calf, the ropes lay discarded, streaked with earth and water, quiet symbols of both struggle and salvation. A few of the men shifted slightly, not to move closer, but to make room. A silent offering of space, a gesture of respect for a creature that had once been helpless among them. The woman who had spoken to it earlier remained kneeling, her hands folded in the mud, her face calm and still. For a moment, the calf turned its head back toward the clearing. Its gaze lingered, unfocused perhaps, but deep enough to hold weight. The faintest sound escaped its throat, not a cry this time, but a low, breathy rumble that trembled through the air. The villagers did not speak. They watched as it shifted its weight, then took another step, deeper now, the distance between human and wild growing once more. With each step, its pace grew steadier, its back straighter. The forest seemed to open around it, leaves rustling softly as if to welcome it home. Then, from somewhere deep within the trees, an answering sound rose, low, resonant, unmistakable. It was not loud, but it carried far, rapping through the mist like a voice calling across time. The calf froze mid-step, its ears lifting, trunk stretching upward. The sound came again, a deeper trumpet, the kind that echoed not fear but belonging. The calf responded with a faint, uncertain call, a child's note in the vastness of the forest song. The villagers felt the moment settle inside them, a warmth that needed no words. The herd was near. A few distant shapes stirred between the trunks, vague, shifting shadows that seemed to move with quiet purpose. The villagers could not see them clearly, yet they knew. These were the elders, the mothers, the keepers of memory returning for one of their own. The calf stepped forward again, its pace quickening slightly now, guided by the rhythm of distant calls. Its small footprints pressed into the wet ground, filling with water almost as soon as they were made. Soon even those would fade.